I'm John Heilemann, and this is the Hell and High Water Podcast.
My guest today is former United States Senator and current MSNBC political analyst, Claire McCaskill.
I'm Claire McCaskill, and the state of our union is better, but still strained by folks who don't appreciate compromise. And the state of my state, Missouri, just sucks.
This bill shows that we can work together. I know a lot of people, some sitting in the audience here, didn't think this could happen. This bill is declared dead more often than anyway. That bipartisanship was a thing of the past. From the time I announced my candidacy, about bringing the country together and doing things in a bipartisan way, it was characterized as a relic of an earlier age. As you may well remember, I never believed that, and I still don't.
So that's Joe Biden right there, and singing the song of bipartisanship last week after the United States Senate passed the big infrastructure bill and its huge budget outline. We're here on Hell and High Water with Claire McCaskill, my friend, former senator from Missouri, MSNBC commentator extraordinaire, and my fellow room raider all-star, which is like the thing that now binds me to Claire more than anything is that we're both the object of so many people's obsessions over our respective pandemic rooms. How you doing, Claire?
I'm great, and if it hadn't been you, I probably wouldn't have looked to find some flowers to put in the shot. But since it was you, we were very competitive there for a few months. And now it's just become rote habit that we try to, you place your squirrels and I place my cakes and off we go.
So I come back to our friend Joe Biden. When I heard him sing, as I said, that song of bipartisanship this week, you were one of the people I thought of, not just because, I'm sure you were on television commenting on it in real time, but, you were obviously someone who not only believed in bipartisanship and believed in trying to work across the aisle, but whose time in the Senate was a time when that was harder than it had ever been in the history of the country. I mean, to the point where, and it's still really hard, obviously. And I wondered what you were thinking as you saw Joe Biden, make this promise, which he keeps pointing out to us. He made this promise in the campaign and people doubted that he could make good on it. And then to have achieved what he's achieved, which we will note is not yet law and is still, I would say, a fair distance from becoming law, but it's not a non accomplishment to have managed to get that big giant stack of votes for a very, very large bill on a bipartisan basis in the U.S. Senate.
It's been a long time since a president has been able to garner that many votes of the opposing party in the United States Senate. And so one of our fellow commentators on MSNBC said today, and I quote, "Getting infrastructure passed is easy." No, it's not. Nothing is easy in a country that's as divided as we are. And that's what I think, one of the hard things about this. I had a pretty progressive record, John. I mean, I didn't go Front Street with it when I was in Missouri because frankly, the NRA always came after me because I was against the NRA on everything. I had 100% pro-choice reproductive freedom record. I had all of the things that you're not supposed to have and win statewide in Missouri. But one of the reasons was I also emphasized other things when I campaigned and when I was out there. And I think the hard thing for me is when people don't realize that it's not just that we have a razor thin majority in Congress. It's that this country is divided. And so nobody should be disappointed that we got a compromise through and that it's big and it's the first major infrastructure bill in a long time. When
I was a young reporter in Washington, D.C., one of my favorite sources, because he was the most brilliant senator, my time alive on planet Earth was Pat Moynihan. And I used to go see Pat pretty frequently. And we'd sit in his Senate hideout. And at the time when the Clintons were trying to pass healthcare, he was constantly warning about how you couldn't try to reform a seventh of the economy on a partisan basis. He was like, it will not last. This is not how large-scale social legislation will not be durable if you pass it by 51 votes. You must get 70 or 75 votes, not because there's some inherent value to bipartisanship, but because if you're doing something that large, you must have like the country behind it in a broad way, or else it will just unravel and get picked apart in years hence. Is there any chance that there can be bipartisanship at the end? Not now, but bipartisanship in the final votes, which are the ones that really count for history?
Well, there will be bipartisanship as long as the bills stay separate. I think you will still get a big Republican vote on the infrastructure bill. I don't think you'll ever get a Republican vote on the Biden package that is going to go through reconciliation. And, there's a lot of reasons why the Senate has become dysfunctional. And it would be too boring for me to go into the weeds on all of them. But, it has changed dramatically since I got there in 2007. I think one of the reasons it's changed dramatically is there was a decision made by Mitch McConnell when he was in the minority and Harry Reid was the majority leader under Obama, that his job was to stop everything. So he started using the Senate rules in a way they'd never been used before. Just to give you an example, my first amendment that we had debated and voted on the floor was collective bargaining for TSA. Okay, that was my very first vote. I won it 61-59. I'll never forget that one of the Republican senators wandered over and, loped his arm around my shoulder and said, that's a close vote, Claire. And I said, Senator, where I come from, that's a landslide. So those were the days that you could take a vote on something like that and no one was requiring a cloture vote. Nobody was requiring a 60 vote margin. So there were lots of amendments that passed without 60 votes. Then Mitch McConnell decided he was going to use his obstructionism to make Obama look bad. And he began a very focused effort to stop nominations, to stop Obama's agenda. And then, of course, once he had that power and husbanded that power, then Harry Reid decided, okay, we're going to get rid of some of the rules and make it easier for at least Obama to get his cabinet and low-level judges. Yeah. And that was the door that opened that now you find that everything has to have 60 votes and nominations never have to have 60 votes. So how do we get out of this trap? Well, one, the membership has to rise up against leadership and say, you can't husband all this power like they do in the House. Yeah. You can't write bills behind closed doors. You have to write bills in committees. And if a bill comes out of a committee with a bipartisan vote, I'm very much in favor of a rule change that it goes immediately to the floor. Now, Schumer's going to kill me for saying this because he doesn't want, control of the floor is the majority leader's purview. Right. But there has to be some way that we break this logjam. And there is all kinds of filibuster reform we can do that will contribute to bipartisanship without completely blowing up bipartisanship so that if the Republicans win next year, we're not faced with a major defunding of Planned Parenthood all over the country. I worked around the problems I had because I was a woman, but then I used my experience to try to move the needle on issues that I think impact women more seriously than men.
As a local prosecutor, I understand every day that there is no silver bullet to the crime problem in this country. What the Republicans don't seem to understand is just more police and prisons will not get the job done. We have to have a comprehensive approach, and Congress listened to the professionals of local law enforcement when they enacted that comprehensive approach last fall. For Congress to step back from its responsibility at this point would be a cruel hoax on this country. Those of us who must face the violence every day would urge the Republicans to realize that to be short-sighted now is risking our children's safety, our family's safety, and it's very important that we remain committed to this comprehensive approach.
So you were talking about Joe Biden's crime bill, now a hugely controversial thing in many quarters of the Democratic Party. The panel somehow got convened by Governor Carnahan at the time, and you were on the rise, Claire. Because of your background, which you're a lawyer and you were a prosecutor, your crime and various dimensions of crime and law enforcement were a big part of your political career. And obviously crime is now a very hot issue in our politics. Republicans see it as a way of beating Democrats by trying to paint them with the defund the police brush. I just want you to talk about how that issue evolved, because I do want to talk about your history here. You know, in the course of your career, how the issue of crime evolved and how the posture towards crime of the Democratic Party has changed over time, and what you make of it. Because that time back in when the crime bill was passed in 1994, it was not seen as obviously as a retrograde or right-wing thing. Now, obviously, much of the Democratic progressive base thinks it is, and yet now we're having more discussions about putting more cops back on the beat in the Senate just last week. So, I just give me an overview of that issue and the politics of it.
Well, keep in mind that I was the elected prosecutor in Kansas City. I ran the largest prosecutor's office in the state, and we handled about 10,000 felonies a year. And we were having record violent crime in the early 90s, mostly because of crack and meth and other really serious ingrained drug problems that brought about all kinds of associated violence. But at the same time, I was much different than most prosecutors in that I got it that there was low-level drug offenses that should not go in prison. And so one of the things I worked with, and that's when I first began my treks to Washington, was establishing a drug court. I was the first prosecutor involved, other than Janet Reno, in actually moving a drug court to the front of my community and starting a drug court and figuring out that low-level people who have only committed nonviolent crimes because of drugs, we shouldn't waste prison space on them. So, I think I have a pretty grounded and varied background in law enforcement. And I understand that more police officers don't necessarily mean more people in prison if you do it right. And one of the things I think the crime bill has gotten a really bad rap on, people forget what else was in there. I mean, the violence against women stuff was in there. We were able to do a victim advocacy unit for the first time with federal money for that bill. The community policing was huge. Not only did we do community policing, we expanded it to community prosecutors. So what happened in neighborhoods that were riddled with lots of crime, you had a prosecutor and police officers that came to your neighborhood meetings, that came and knocked on your door and said, what's going on? What can we help with? That shepherded cases through the system, that came from those communities and stayed in contact with people in those communities, that built trust in those communities. That's what we need to be focused on, not just a black or white, police are bad or police are good. There are bad police officers. We've all seen it. Now with videos on every phone, we're going to continue to find the bad police officers much more effectively than we ever have before. And that is a really good thing. And we need to get them out and we need to send them to prison like we did with the tragedy that occurred. I mean, I'll never forget a meeting I had with a mother who told me the hardest thing for her to decide every night was which child slept in the bathtub, because she knew if they were in the bathtub, they would be safe from a drive-by shooting. So every night she did a Sophie's Choice about which of her children she put in her bathtub to sleep, because she knew they would be safe there. No one should have to live like that in this country. And so you can't short shrift the law enforcement, get people who are killing people off the streets, put them away. You can't short shrift that. But you also need to understand that there's another huge piece that isn't about crime, it's about public health. And that's the drug problem. And I think that if you combine those two, and if more people talk about that, what's really hurtful to the Democrats are people who say, oh, just defund the police, and don't explain that what they really mean is fund it in a way that's more comprehensive. I would love to see more dialogue around that. And that's what we should be doing.
Looking at your resume, I just think of all the things you did where you were the first woman this or the first woman that over the course of a career, that where you were in the state legislature, you were a county legislator, you were the state auditor, you ran for governor and didn't succeed. You ran for Senate and did succeed. But there's so many jobs that you had where you were the first woman this or the first woman that. How conscious were you about placing your gender and your identity as a woman in, like, this is what I want to get done now? I got to the United States Senate. I'm a woman. I'm one of the few women who are up here. How much was that at the forefront of how you thought, this is how I want to spend my time? This is what I want to prioritize. These are the issues I want to care about. Or did you have the view that some women that I've known in politics have, which is like, just treat me like everybody else. That's not, my gender's not going to be the thing that drives my policy interests. I'm interested in policies for a lot of reasons. Has nothing really to do with it. I'm curious how you weighed that out and kind of decided how to place gender in how you expended your time on policy and how you crafted your image politically.
Well, it's kind of complicated. I'm not proud of how often I sublimated my outrage about the way I had been treated. I'll tell you one story because it was in my book, and this is an absolutely true story. I was a freshman legislator in the Missouri House of Representatives in my late 20s. I was single. And I went up on the dais to talk to the speaker to ask him advice about how I could get my first bill out of committee. And he looked over at me and he said, "Did you bring your knee pads?" And, obviously at that moment, I froze because it was a totally outrageous thing to say to me and hurtful. And it upset me greatly. But of course, I laughed it off and walked away and got that bill out of committee and passed it. Now, those were the kinds of things I had to sublimate for many years of my career. Right. And I'm proud of the women today that are coming forward because I don't think a Speaker of the House of Missouri would ever do that now. And that is progress. Having said that, I also didn't lead with my gender, but I did do things that I think would not have happened had I not been a woman. For example, when I got to be prosecutor in Kansas City, domestic violence was really never prosecuted. Assaults against someone that purported to love someone were never prosecuted. And so I said, we're going to start a domestic violence unit and we're going to train people and we're going to go after these guys. And of course, my top level male prosecutor said to me, "Well, many times we don't have a victim." And I said, "Well, let's shut down the homicide unit." Well, they fought me. The police department fought me, but we did it. And I worked around the problems I had because I was a woman, but then I used my experience and things that I cared about because I was a woman to try to move the needle on issues that I think impact women more seriously than men. This is what these morons in Jefferson City thought was important in the middle of COVID, is making sure we could all have brass knuckles. It's crazy town.
They would rather I die? You would rather me die? Is that what you want to see? You want to see me die? Because that could be the alternative. So either I spent $70,000 on private security over the last few months, and I'm here standing now and able to speak, able to help save 11 million people from being evicted, or I could possibly have a death attempt on my life. So if I end up spending $200,000, if I spend $10 more on it, you know what? I get to be here to do the work. So suck it up, and defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police and put that money into social safety nets because we're trying to save lives.
So freshman Congresswoman, newest member of the squad, that was her answering the question people say she was asked. You are getting criticism for spending $70,000 on private security while you talk about defunding the police. Is that not hypocritical? And she responds by saying what she said there. She is gotten praise for sleeping out on the Capitol steps and bringing about the revival of this eviction moratorium. She's in the crosshairs, the rhetorical crosshairs, let's be clear, of every Jewish group in the country, because she has now been said some things recently there. She's very anti-Israel, very pro-Palestinian, and has made some comments that some people could kind of interpret as if to say that like somehow the Jews are responsible for poverty in St. Louis. She's controversial. I mean, she's very controversial. She's not been there very long. Hero to some, villain to others. I guess I want to get your read on it, on Cori Bush and her assets, her liabilities, and her prospects.
Well, first of all, I admire her in many ways because she beat Lacey Clay because she really, really worked hard. And I love people who work hard. She comes from an organizing place. She is close to the people in her district that have not had a voice. And I think that is all marvelous. I will say this. I think she will probably stay in Congress for as long as she wants to, because I think the Republicans will draw her district safely. They will take Republicans out of her district and put them in Ann Wagner's district, which is a suburban district in St. Louis.
Right.
And they will put any Democrats that are in Ann Wagner's district in Cori Bush's district. And they will, because they want her to be around. I'm not saying me, I'm saying they see her as ineffective and helpful to their cause. Now, having said all that, I think Cori can do some good work for the people she represents, and I hope she does. But for all the progressives in my state that say, oh, Claire, if you just would have been more liberal, you would have won. I have one question. Will Cori Bush file for the Senate?
Because that is a question.
If in fact she does not file for the Senate, what does that tell you about what this state is versus what Cori's district is? They are light years away from each other in terms of the state as a whole and Cori's district. And by the way, many of the positions Cori has, I agree with. Some I don't.
Right.
But many of them I agree with and voted for. So it's not like she and I are totally different in terms of what we believe in. We're not. Right. But I don't think the way, but I admire her passion, and I admire that she is not afraid to say what she thinks, even if it's things I disagree with. So all in all, I think she is good for her district. And probably all in all, good for our country and good for our party, in that she says things and pushes things that we probably need to hear. But whether or not she's going to be effective at moving the needle, I think that remains to be seen.
Obviously, you made it clear you're not going to run for Senate in 2022. Roy Blunt's not running. There's an open Senate seat in the state of Missouri. And there's a shit show going on the right where you could end up with someone who's beatable. And you've been in that seat, you've had that experience too with Todd Akin, where you have a beatable Republican. Why not run again?
Oh, because I have no desire. Listen, I am so happy. I feel guilty. I had no idea somebody would pay me real money just to talk about politics. I mean, it's like ridiculous. I control my own schedule. Which I'd not done for 40 years. I had no idea how hard I was working. And by the way, when you said earlier they left on vacation, I never had a vacation in August. I will never run for office again, ever, ever, ever. Now, having said that, stay tuned in Missouri. I think we could have a surprise. I think we could have a candidate who has no political experience, but has a great resume, has money, is not from one of the bright blue areas. I think you could have somebody who could splash on the scene, much like Greitens, who I think could win the Republican primary. And just to remind everyone that Eric Greitens was the governor that we discovered had taped up a woman he was having an affair with duct tape to his gym equipment in his basement, ripped open her T-shirt and spit water into her mouth, threatening to take pictures. I mean, this is the kind of guy we're talking about. The Republicans ran him out of office. Yes. But he's being very Trump. Wasn't true. They did this to me, and it's working. And he's winning in the polls right now. And they got a lot of candidates running, and he could easily win. So we may have exactly what the doctor ordered in terms of a candidate, somebody who's never been in politics before, who doesn't have a voting history, who has presence and a network and the ability to get it done. I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic.
It sounds like you're thinking about somebody in particular.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, my phone rings a lot with people who are interested and people who are running. And there's two candidates who have declared that are good candidates too. So I just think they've gone so far in Missouri. You know, we are one of the top COVID states. We have done everything. I mean, during the height of COVID, this is how bad it is. You know what the Missouri legislature did, John? During the height of COVID? They legalized brass knuckles. You can't make this shit up. You just can't make it up. This is what these morons in Jefferson City thought was important in the middle of COVID, is making sure we could all have brass knuckles.
Well,
it's crazy town.
I mean, look, it's the only thing that keeps me from having brass knuckles on all the time is that I'm always afraid that I'll get picked up in a state that where brass knuckles are illegal. So I appreciate the effort on the part.
Come to Missouri. Your brass knuckles are welcome in Missouri, John.
We are lucky to have had you here today on Hell and High Water, my friend. Claire McCaskill. Thanks for hanging out today.
You bet.